Today I am tackling the huge, very confusing world of watercolor paper. Watercolor paper should be very straightforward. You're using watercolors, you need watercolor paper, but it comes in a huge variety of price points, cotton counts, weights, finishes, sizes, shapes. It's really actually quite overwhelming. So in today's video, I'm gonna break it down for you and show you exactly how I choose my favorite papers for my jobs that I'm doing. But for me, and this is the biggest takeaway, even if you don't watch the rest of the video, is it should all be determined on how you want the end product or project to look in the end. So we're going to start at the end, backtrack, and that is how I'm going to teach you how you can choose the perfect watercolor paper for your lesson or your project or your fine art today. All right, you ready? Okay, let's dive in. And if you're new to my channel, hi there, my name is Campbell. I have taught tens of thousands of people how to get better at drawing and painting across my 2 YouTube channels and my awesome art school, which is awesome. Which is why that's what it's called. I've also authored over 24 books. And so just teaching people how to make art easy is my passion, because when it's easy, it's more fun. And when it's fun, we do it more. And then that's how you get super duper good. So I'm going to flip my camera around. We're going to look at the differences in some of these papers, but I'm not going to go into tremendous detail. I actually just want to tell you exactly what you need for what you wanted to look for. So before I flip my camera around, and I will, it's just important for you to know that there's 3 kinds of watercolor paper at like the most basic level. There's hot press, which is super smooth, like Bristol skating rink smooth. It's delightful for drawing on. There's cold press. Cold press is the most commonly found watercolor paper. So in all of your like generic, undefined watercolor papers and journals, if it doesn't say anything on it, 99% sure that's going to be your cold press for you. And then the third kind is rough press, which is really hard to find in a journal form, and it's the least commonly found, and it is really fun to work with. But because it's a little bit harder to get a hold of. I don't teach on it very much, but on occasion I do, because it's just delicious and delightful and completely different than the other 2 papers. So your decisions are going to come down to hot press, smooth, or cold press, which is textured. Okay, so those are like the basic differences between hot press and cold press. And rough is exactly as it sounds. It's really rough, like super rough, and that has its own look entirely. So again, I'm going to flip my camera around so you can actually see what this looks like in person. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is just how this paper looks without artwork on it. So remember, there's 3 kinds. Hot press, which is super duper smooth. So if you zoom in, you can see that you can't feel any tooth. Tooth is a term that just means texture. It's super smooth. And if I was to describe this, it feels like a cardstock is what it feels like a really smooth cardstock, but it's not. It is watercolor paper, and that is in fact very different than cardstock. And also make sure when you're buying papers, you have to see the word watercolor paper or it's not going to be watercolor. Okay, this is cold press, and as you can see, if I zoom in, you can actually see all the little nooks and crannies, just like a little English muffin of all the little nooks and crannies. So you can feel that this is textured, and you can really actually see it on your paper when you're looking at it. The third kind is rough, as I mentioned, and this is, as you can tell, this is extremely, well, it's rough. It feels rough. It feels heavy and scrappy and tough, and it's bananas, and it's very different. So that is in the 3 general categories. Okay, so that's just kind of an overall. Now let me show you what those look like when you actually put art on them, just so you can see the different effects. Okay, so what does this look like in real life, so to speak? Well, hot pressed has a much more of like a graphic look, and you can see it stains. It stains. It almost looks like working with like a magic marker. It looks like a marker rather than watercolor a lot of times. If you saw this, you might not even understand that this was watercolor. So it's very hard edges, and it has a very different look. And because of these hard edges, when I'm working on a hot press, I usually have to couple this with either colored pencils or graphite or other instruments if I want to add more subtlety or smooth shading, because the hot press gives you such that stain. It's like a stain because it has so little water that it can take. It's a very different look, and it's a very different feel. All of them, and across all my whimsical watercolor books, these all are done on the same hot press paper. Okay, and then again, I'm using different tools. Graphite, in this case, I'm using also graphite, and this one colored pencils from Widow Women to create those little blending areas. Now with cold press, you don't need to rely on as many other tools to give you those effects, because you can use so much water and you can blend just a lot more easily. So you can do like big puffy clouds, and you don't have the aggressive like hard dash line. It's much easier to avoid that on cold press, because all you do is add more water. You can add a ton of water on cold press and it can really handle it. So you can do like, things like clouds and layers and these glazes, and these soft transitions are all done with a ton of water. You can't use a ton of water with hot press, which is why it doesn't work, and which is why the end result look is actually totally different. So that was kind of the difference between hot press and cold press. So what about rough? Rough is super fun. It's like cold press on crack, where you can really, here's a really good one. You can use a ton of water, so you can make different gradations very easily, because you're just adding more water. The difference in how this look is super fun too, because it takes the pigments, especially if you're using things like granulating watercolors, and if you're not sure what that is, I have a whole video on that. I will link it in the description for you. But you can see like it pools the pigments inside all the little nook and crannies of your paper, but it's so satisfying and really wonderful to work with. We're all little nooks and crannies. You can steer in the heavier amounts of pigment with your brush. You can use water to very easily spread this around. It's kind of a dream to work on. I was doing cloud practice in here. It's just completely different experience altogether. Now be forewarned, there's a lot of paper out there that people sell in journals that they market it as rough cut, and it is not. It is a rag paper, which is very different than rough, and it doesn't work as well. It's not actually watercolor paper at all, but it has little raggy edges. That's usually just cotton rag paper. So just be careful when you're buying a journal that is supposedly watercolor paper. Make sure you look for the actual words watercolor paper, so you know what you're doing, that and you're not getting cotton rag, because it does not work the same at all, and it does not work well at all either. All right, so those are your choices. You have, again, hot press, staining, cotton, smearing, and rough. You have those pools of pigments, and you can use a ton of water, and it's a very different look. So another thing you need to consider also is the shape of your paper. It comes in different shapes. Did you know this? You can buy it in a block, but you can also buy like tall and skinny paper. Look at this one. This is 15 by 40 centimeters, which is so fun. So you can buy it in sheets that are glued on. You can also buy it in a block. Okay, a block is awesome. Here's two. This is also a block that I've been working on, and this is amazing because you can throw a ton of water on it and your paper will not buckle while it's attached to this block, which is something that you really want, especially if you're using super heavy water applications. Your paper can get super bendy crazy, so working on blocks is amazing, but blocks tend to be very expensive, so you don't have to work on a block if you can't afford it, but usually these come with a much higher price tag. So how do you look for more affordable watercolor paper? Well, one of those is to use watercolor paper that's not 100% cotton. All right, what is going to drive up the price of watercolor paper is if it's 100% cotton. That will make it super expensive. Blocks are also super expensive, and also weight. Heavy weight is also super expensive. So if you have all of those, and usually a heavy weight is like 300 pounds. Okay, you have your blocks, which are glued. So this is not journals, and this is 100% cotton. Okay, good news is that there's so many companies out there, and a lot of them make very affordable, but also very nice quality paper that is not 100%, that isn't on a block, and that isn't as heavy as this. Now, before I go any further, I will say this. What order did I have this in? Okay, I would not go less than 25% cotton. Okay, you need to have some sort of a minimum standard, and this should be your minimum standards. 25% cotton for sure. The binding, I think, is totally open. Does not need to be glued. It does not need to be, I don't like a ring. I like this because then you don't have a jagged edge. That's just my preference. So I like to have a glued binding if I can't afford a block. Okay, and then the last one is, oh yes, the weight. I would do 140 pounds, which is 300 GSM. Okay, I would do this as a minimum. Glued is my personal preference, and 25 is the minimum. This set of requirements will get you a good price, like not so expensive that you can afford it, and you can have excellent results. So if you're on a budget, but you still want to have very high quality grade, you know, fine art projects that you can sell professionally, like these, this is an amazing combination that will way drive down your price significantly, but you'll still have wonderful, wonderful results. Okay, so this is my cheat sheet. So take a picture of this so you don't forget. If you're a high-end fine artist and you have no budget, then you want to aim for this. You want 100% cotton. You would love to be working on a block, and your weight will be as heavy as possible, but is not necessary. And I can say that because I am a professional artist, and this is what I use 99% of the time. Okay, so just making you aware of all the things. You have lots of choices, so I don't want you to be bummed if you can't afford the Cadillac of all hot press, cold press, or rough papers. So I hope that was helpful to learn the differences between the price and the finish and the shape and all the things. So the way that I choose my paper is per project and how I want it to look at the end. So first of all, if I am going to be doing any sort of like drawing, like quite a bit of drawing, pretty much I will always use a hot press paper because it's just frankly easier to draw on. The second reason I would use a hot press is if I want something to look like it was colored almost like a magic marker. It has like a stained effect. It has very hard edges and it almost looks like a marker. And I use it for my whimsical watercolor book series that I'm publishing right now. So everything I'm done for all of those books, I'm on my 4th book in the series right now, are all done on hot press because I love the stained, very hard lined, hard edge look is just the look that I'm trying to capture. When you're using a lot of water application, so think skies, landscapes, flowing hair, blush, subtly transitioned cheeks. Oh my, it's really snowing outside. Check this out. I live in North Carolina. It's a proper snow. Go and see. So if you're using a big water application, you're gonna really need to use cold press because it can take all that water like brilliantly. Your pigments will flush together. They won't dry with a super hard line. If you want to, it's very easy to take a wet brush and just run it along that hard edge to soften it up. And the water plus the paper, they intermingle like this magical sponge, and the effects are so soft and intermingled, and it's completely different than the effect that the hot press paper gives you. Now, the third option, of course, is the rough. Now, I love, interestingly, just like I love to do little cartoon quirky characters on my hot press, I also like to do the same thing with my rough press. It gives it a more, I want to say, like, because it's like a tactile, something you can really see and appreciate, almost like a plushy stuffed animal, where you can see the nooks and the crannies, and you can see the pigments like getting embedded into all the little nooks. And it brings your little, for me, the little cartoon characters, it brings them to life in like a completely different way. So the hot press also that I use for all my little whimsical dogs and cats and women and all the other little animals. This wouldn't show up very well if I was using rough cut for my books, because the little nooks and crannies on the scanner are just going to show up very strangely as well. And it's really hard to draw on rough paper. It's really hard to draw. So that's also like, it's not good if you're like a beginner and you're trying to add like a precise pupil. Trying to like get it in the nooks and the crannies of your paper is going to be like a nightmare. So that's how I choose my paper, as I work backwards. What do I want the end result to look like? Am I drawing? Am I painting? And then like what's the characteristic? So hot press, cold press. I use rough cut maybe 10% of the time, and the other two 50-50. Most people I know only use cold press and hardly ever use hot press. They don't like the fact that it doesn't take a lot of water. It makes your watercolors behave in a different way. You can't use a lot of water. You can't go in and you can't do big, heavy, wet on wet applications at all. But like for my cartoon animals, like I don't need to. I just need my little coloring thing, and I'm good to go. So I hope this was really helpful for you. In terms of not breaking the bank, people get very opinionated on what kind of brands and whatnot. So there's like a million brands, so I'm not going to be going over all the different brands. And also between each brand, they also have individual characteristics for the individual papers, even within each brand. So I will just show you my favorites and take that with it what you will. Okay. I only have like a million projects under my belt. So you can trust me, but you can also don't have to listen to me, because it's just my opinion. So for cold press, my favorite is this Fabriano. It's only 25% cotton, which means the price goes way down, which I like because I do hundreds of projects every single year. So this is my favorite. And alternatively, I like the hot press rendition of this well, also just 25% cotton. So that drives that price way down so I can afford it. I'm doing projects every single day. I can't afford a $5, dog because I have 18, 17, 15 in each book. I'm doing books. I'm doing lessons for all three of my art clubs. Like I have a lot of painting happening and I can't afford it. So that drives the price down, but this paper is phenomenal and I use it all the time. So I can tell you with huge confidence that it is awesome. My other favorites, if I do need to use like a ton of water, I'm doing like a luscious landscape or what have you. And I know I need like massive water application because I need a dreamy watercolory look. I will bust out my Arches cold press because it can take it, like period. It can take it. The lower cotton count quality paper can't handle all of that water. So I'm going to be working on a block. So a block, which means all of your papers are glued together and in situ and are not going to be buckling while you're pouring so much water on your paper using your mop brushes. It can handle absolutely everything that you can throw at it. So I save my super expensive Arches block paper for those specific instances when I need that. But that's actually pretty, and I wouldn't say rare, but I'm not normally doing these giant wet on wet applications. I'm usually just using a regular amount of watercolor. And so this 25% paper is absolutely fine for 80% of all of my lessons that I'm doing over at my awesome art school. So as a rule of thumb, once again, if you're doing any sort of wet on wet, you want nice and blendy, use cold press. It is your friend. If you want a stained, more graphic look, then I would recommend using a hot press. It has a very different vibe and a feel, and it can't handle the same amount of water. You have to use a lot less water for much more of a stained graphic look. Okay, so if you're following my Whimsical Watercolors and How to Draw series, get hot press. This is the exact paper that I use for all of them. Okay, this is like the series is ongoing right now, which is why I am listing it and making a priority to just make sure that you know. Okay, all of those. All right, I hope you learned a lot. I hope you understand what you can and cannot do with each kind, and I hope you understand what it looks like for each one. Next week I'm going to come back with a video on how to correct your watercolor mistakes. If you make a mistake while you're painting, what the heck can you do to erase it, eliminate it, ameliorate it, all the things. All right, subscribe so you don't miss out, and I'll see you next Wednesday. And check the description box below for a lot more videos and a lot more watercolor techniques, tips, and tricks for you. All right, I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.